On All In.
All we heard was boom, and every airbag deployed.
The federal occupation of Minneapolis continues.
Who is here to protect us? We are under attack by our own federal government, which is unprecedented.
And the Trump Justice Department opens investigations into the mayor of Minneapolis and Governor Tim Walz.
Mayor Jacob Frey, Governor Tim Walz, Attorney General Keith Ellison have deliberately, willfully, and purposefully incited this violent insurrection.
Tonight, the latest political targets of the Trump administration, the push from the family of Renee Good for an investigation, and why all of this is playing so poorly with the American people. But All In starts right now. Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. The Trump administration is weaponizing the Department of Justice against two top Minnesota Democrats, Governor Tim Walz and Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey. The two men are, we've just learned, apparently under federal criminal investigation on allegations they are impeding federal law enforcement. MS Now reports that subpoenas are going out. Of course, all these men have actually done, as we've seen here and covered, is publicly defend with their speech the rights of their constituents, who are actively under assault by Trump's federal agents. Right now, there are 3,000 of those agents in the state, mostly in Minneapolis, a city that only has about 600 sworn police officers, meaning local law enforcement's massively outnumbered, just to give a sense of the scale here. And the feds, as you can see there, as we've been playing for 2 weeks now, are acting frankly like an occupying force, like they are an enemy territory, that they're there to subdue the people. Walz and Frey have emerged as two very vocal critics of that regime, especially in the wake of the tragic killing of Renee Good by an ICE agent last week. Frey famously offered this blunt declaration for the forces in his city.
They are already trying to spin this as an action of self-defense. Having seen the video of myself, I want to tell everybody directly, that is bullshit. There's little I can say, again, that'll make this situation better, but I do have a message for our community, for our city, and I have a message for ICE. To ICE, get the fuck out of Minneapolis. We do not want you here. Your stated reason for being in this city is to create some kind of safety, and you are doing exactly the opposite.
And Minnesota Governor Walz has been a near constant presence in Minneapolis, calling for peace, acting as a bulwark against Donald Trump's essentially invasion of his state.
My fellow Minnesotans, what's happening in Minnesota right now defies belief. News reports simply don't do justice to the level of chaos and disruption and trauma the federal government is raining down upon our communities. 2,000 to 3,000 armed agents of the federal government have been deployed to Minnesota. Armed, masked, undertrained ICE agents are going door to door, ordering people to point out where their neighbors of color live. Let's be very, very clear. This long ago stopped being a matter of immigration enforcement. Instead, it's a campaign of organized brutality against the people of Minnesota by our own federal government.
In response to the reporting about these investigations, both the governor and mayor have released statements tonight. Mayor Frey said in part, quote, "This is an obvious attempt to intimidate me for standing up for Minneapolis, our local law enforcement, and our residents against the chaos and danger this administration has brought to our streets. I will not be intimidated. My focus will remain where it's always been, keeping our city safe." Frey told MS Now that he has not received a subpoena. Governor Walz said, quote, 2 days ago it was Alyssa Slotkin. Last week it was Jerome Powell. Before that, Mark Kelly. Weaponizing the justice system and threatening political opponents is a dangerous authoritarian tactic. The only person not being investigated for the shooting of Renee Good is the federal agent who shot her. The governor is exactly right. In fact, just last week, Trump lashed out at federal prosecutors at the White House. According to a Wall Street Journal report, he complained that the prosecutors were weak and not moving quickly enough to prosecute his critics. That's according to people familiar with the matter. MS Now has not confirmed that reporting, but of course, Donald Trump has publicly called for his critics to be indicted and investigated many times, including in an explicit message to Attorney General Pam Bondi posted on social media. And now we have seen those federal probes and indictments unfold rapidly. Look at that graphic for a second. Take that in, okay? Mark Kelly, Alyssa Slotkin, Jerome Powell, now Walls and Fry join the growing list of the president's critics to face trumped-up investigations and charges. Joining me now with the details, MS Now Justice Intelligence correspondent Ken Dilanian. Ken, what can you tell us about what we know about these, quote, investigations?
Good evening, Chris. Well, details are sparse, but I'm told that the premise of this investigation is a statute in the U.S. Code called 18 U.S.C. 372, which makes it a crime to commit a conspiracy to impede or injure an officer. It's the same thing they're charging some protesters with, and it's based on their public statements, as we understand it, just like some of the ones you played tonight. And we understand that grand jury subpoenas in this case have been prepared, but neither the mayor nor the governor say they have received them yet, and that this investigation is being run out of the U.S. Attorney's Office in Minneapolis, no doubt with consultation from Washington. And of course, it's raising the very questions that you just raised, which is how can these public statements by these senior officials amount to the crime of impeding federal immigration enforcement? How can just words do that? Don't they have a First Amendment right to make these statements? And how could the Justice Department be doing this, targeting these Democrats who are opposing Donald Trump and his policies politically, Chris?
Now, I know we don't, what we know is small right now, sparse, as you said. So I'm aware of that. I mean, first of all, there's the First Amendment problem, right? But just to get into that office, I mean, you've got a U.S. attorney there appointed by Donald Trump, sort of a local Republican guy. But 6 U.S. attorneys, assistant U.S. attorneys, including the number 2 in that office, very respected career official, resigned just a few days ago. And they resigned, we think, because they were being pressured to start some sort of criminal investigation of Renee Good's widow. Isn't that right?
That's correct. We've reported that as well as others. And they were concerned about the direction of that investigation, not exclusively focusing on her, but just the fact that it was focusing on the victim of this incident, the person who was shot and killed, when normally the Justice Department, and particularly the Civil Rights Division, but also local prosecutors, would investigate the conduct of the officer. The officer actually is the one that killed the citizen. And so that's normally the subject of the investigation. They were very troubled by that. But the thing about resigning in protest, Chris, is that, it sort of creates a problem of who's left. And the Justice Department, hundreds, if not thousands, of prosecutors and attorneys and support staff have left the Justice Department in the last year. And the people who remain are either clinging to their jobs to pay the mortgage and feed their kids, or they support what's going on. And increasingly, people who support what's going on are getting in senior roles, even in the career ranks of the Justice Department, Chris.
Yeah, precisely the reason I brought up that context, again, this is just a few days ago, in the context of this story, is just because I think it's important that it appears that whoever the lawyers are in that operation are lawyering this. We don't know at what stage the investigation is. The second thing, aside from the First Amendment issue, which just seems dispositive to me, I'm not a lawyer, but that's just squarely constitutionally protected speech, obviously. But this section of the federal code, you mentioned this. I mean, there have been a number of occasions in which protesters or other folks have been charged with this, and we've gotten a few no true bills, grand juries refusing to indict. I think there's been a few acquittals. They have used this quite a bit, but actually just even with low-level people on a sidewalk have had a very hard time actually securing convictions on facts that might even seem better for the prosecution than just the words of a public official.
Yeah, and this is where you get to the extraordinary way this Justice Department is being operated. Because normally the federal government, the Justice Department, only brings cases they know they can win. But in this case, and it takes very little, actually, predicate to open a criminal investigation.
Right.
That's all that's happening here. Grand jury subpoena is going out. We have no idea whether this will ever get to charges. It may never get to charges. But the point is they've got their headline. It's intimidating. It's chilling. The force of the federal government. Grand jury subpoenas going to the offices of the mayor and the governor, demanding documents. So that's maybe the goal here, in fact, and it's not how the Justice Department is supposed to work. The power of the federal prosecutor is an awesome power. It needs to be wielded responsibly. It has historically, even in the first Trump administration, we did not see things like this, but we're seeing it on a weekly basis now, Chris.
The other news today, legally, is the widow of Renee Good securing counsel for a possible civil case against the federal government, sending messages for them to retain messages and stuff. It seems, obviously the bar for suing federal officials is quite high, but it also seems that, the law works in both directions. And to your point before about how the victim here was not really getting any kind of investigatory heft from the government on her behalf, it does seem that there will be some sort of private cause of action here from surviving family members.
Yeah, they'll certainly try. It is extraordinarily difficult under various precedents and Supreme Court rulings to sue the federal government if the officer was acting within the scope of his duties, and that's certainly what he would argue. Whether he was negligent, whether he was reckless, he was acting within the scope of his duties, and that's I've seen a lot of cases where you saw obvious negligence by an FBI agent, dismissed, but they may have other causes of action that may allow them to get discovery to get to more of the truth of what happened. That'll be sort of little consolation, but it'll be something.
All right, Ken Dilanian, thanks so much for breaking this news and joining us the last minute. Really appreciate it.
Sure.
I want to bring in now Elliot Payne, who serves as the Minneapolis City Council president. Council member, I got to say that I have seen so many people from your city praising your actions over the last few weeks and how you've been basically out in the street all day long. And I want to ask you about what you've seen before. I want to just ask your reaction to this news about these supposed criminal investigations directed at the mayor of your city and the governor of your state.
Well, first, thanks for having me. And I learned about this news on my way into the studio. And my first reaction to it is that it's laughable. It is completely incompetent. It is a reflection of the recklessness of this administration that I'm seeing actually on the streets every single day. The people that are out trying to terrorize our community are the most untrained, undisciplined, chaotic people I have ever interacted with in government. We in Minneapolis have been going through a reckoning for many years. I ran for city council after the murder of George Floyd. I have been at the forefront of the work of transforming and reforming a public safety system that failed our community. And I've been working side by side with police professionals that actually have a dedication to demonstrating some competency in this space. And the people that I'm interacting with from the federal government are completely untrained, they're completely lawless, they're careless, they're reckless, they're disrespectful. And I think that's a reflection of how this DOJ is approaching these just complete farce of an indictment.
One consistent theme I've heard from people living in Minneapolis that I've been personally in touch with and also just through social media and reporting is just the difficulty in conveying just how chaotic and disrupted daily life is. And I wonder if you could just walk us through, what is your day life right now? I know that you're basically going around the city trying to kind of put out fires caused by these federal agents, but try to give us a sense of that if you can.
So what I'm trying to do most days is spend time along my most active corridor. That's Central Avenue Northeast in Minneapolis. And this is one of our cultural corridors, areas that we have designated as diverse and culturally significant to our community. The Ecuadorian consulate is on Central Avenue. And what we do is we just find a coffee shop where we post up. And all you have to do is wait before you see an SUV full of militarized thugs drive down the street. That's exactly what happened on Monday evening when I was recording a video just to update my community on the lawsuit that we were bringing forward to the Trump administration. When they started shining their flashlights on us, a whole group of people started chasing after them with their whistles. I got on my car and caught up with them. And they had pulled over and started harassing a U.S. citizen on a bus stop who was just trying to get home from work. I went up to them. I introduced myself as the council president. I had my phone in my hand. I asked, did this individual have a warrant? Are they free to go? And there was one of their officers bandying about his taser, pointing it at everyone, pointing it at one of my staff members in the chest, just completely operating without any sense of discipline or control. So I had my eyes on him when all of a sudden another officer walked by and shoved me into the street. I'm physically fine, but this attempt at terrorizing our community is it's unsustainable.
I've heard stories from reporters of just watching, a Latina woman at a bus stop just essentially disappeared, like 0 to 60 seconds. SUV pulls up, people get out. Michelle Norris, who's our great colleague, told me this story in the podcast I just did with her, and they just talk to her for 30 seconds, then she's in the car. I've heard multiple stories like this. I've also heard incredible stories, and I wonder if you can talk about this, of just community resilience. I mean, you've got churches that are putting together 12,000 meals for people that are essentially sheltering in place. You've got volunteers ringing schools in vests. There's something very beautiful and inspiring about how the people of Minneapolis have come together across lines of difference to defend each other.
Inspiring is the absolute right word. Our entire community is organized right now. They are coming out and they are scheduling shifts at at pickup for school, shifts for school getting out, shifts for schools at recess. We heard reports today of a school having ICE agents scoping out kids at recess. This is just completely depraved activity. And the shining light here is just the love, care, and consideration our community has for each other, how much we're stepping up and organizing to make sure that they're not going to be able to move throughout our city without having eyes on them and without those whistles going off. And so they're not able to snatch up our neighbors when we know that we are organized and we are out there. And that's the thing that's giving me a lot of hope in this moment.
We just got news, and I don't have the details. I basically have a headline that a federal judge has issued a temporary restraining order from federal agents targeting protesters. I think that's pursuant to one of the lawsuits. There's a bunch. It may have been the one that your office was part of filing. Do you have, in other cities, we have seen the federal courts have actually stepped in, and even if not, it's been definitive, have ruled in favor of plaintiffs and have exercise some meaningful kind of friction on these sorts of operations. Are you encouraged by that? Is that your hope here?
I am encouraged by that because, honestly, this is amateur hour. The way that this federal government operates, whether it's subpoenaing elected officials or sending thugs throughout major cities, this is the work of despots. This is the work of a president who's desperate that he's not in control. He thinks he's a king, but he doesn't understand we live under a constitution with separation of powers. He doesn't have the authority to do what he's doing, and he's lashing out at the citizens of America because of the failures of his presidency.
One other thing that I've heard from a number of people in Minneapolis I've been talking to is just that there's this, I mean, this is an obvious point, but the suspicion is racialized, right? That they're going up to people that they quote unquote suspect of being immigrants, and that's people largely who are black or brown or present as non-white, and that it has had a really apparent effect of just public life in Minneapolis. Like people of color are being forced out of public spaces. That this is the kind of world that this occupation has created, and I'm wondering if that syncs up with what you've seen.
Oh, absolutely. There's no rhyme or reason why you would pick Minneapolis to do a surge of this nature. We don't have a huge undocumented population in our city.
Yeah, that's true.
Other states have much larger undocumented immigrant populations, especially with this targeting of our East African community. Over 90% of that community are citizens. They're either born here, they're very young, or they came here as refugees and have full legal status in our country. This is pure politics. This is pure intimidation. This is a president that does not like that we are a welcoming, loving, and caring city, and he rejects our values and is attacking us for them.
Minneapolis City Council President Elliott Payne, on a very busy day and a very busy moment, I really appreciate you taking time for us. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
We'll have much more on Donald Trump's latest attempt to prosecute people who stand up to him next. Donald Trump's attempts to destroy our most basic constitutional fundamentals on full display tonight. Subpoenas now issued for Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey. The Justice Department accusing them apparently of impeding law enforcement amidst the chaos that ICE has brought to their city, and seems directed solely at the speech, the words they've said about the occupation of their city. And this is part of a pattern, as Trump has spent his first year back in office publicly demanding the top law enforcement officials in the U.S. use the remarkable powers of the state to go after perceived political enemies. Harry Litman served as a U.S. attorney as well as Deputy Assistant Attorney General, and he joins me now. Harry, I want to talk about the subpoena news, but first I want to start on this TRO we just got. That's temporary restraining order. It's from a federal judge, Judge Menendez, in the District of Minnesota. She is a Biden appointee. Plaintiffs basically saying that their constitutional rights are being violated by the use of pepper spray and rough treatment at the hands of federal agents for purely constitutionally protected activities such as protesting. And it appears that the judge basically agrees with them and is telling federal agents to stop using pepper spray and things like that, and for grabbing people out of cars?
I read it differently, but as you say, it's come in the last couple minutes. Yeah. She goes through all the allegations that are bad. She says they are concrete, and defendants, meaning the U.S., have given nothing. But she gives the U.S. a chance to answer on Monday before entering what is under Eighth Circuit law a really severe remedy of a temporary restraining order. So I don't think she's done that yet, but she's really set the table to do it.
Gotcha. Okay, that's helpful. So that we don't have it yet. It's paused till Monday. Now we had something similar that was issued in Illinois by a federal district judge again against ISIS tactics, using pepper spray. We saw them, using pepper spray and tear gas in outside an elementary school at 2:30 in the middle of the day, and a federal judge saying you cannot do this. This has been a recurring problem.
100%, although what the judges have said to date is follow the damn law. This is, as Rodriguez says, a kind of a cutting edge issue having to do with states' rights, the 10th Amendment. I think it's going to be a sort of growth area around the country, but she calls it a constitutional kind of, new unexplored fully issue. So all she's doing is giving the United States a chance to respond. But she lays it all out in pretty damning detail. And it's clear that the U.S. comes in with nothing, hasn't even tried to rebut the allegations.
Final point I'll make on this, and then I want to talk about these the subpoenas that are going out, is that there's been a pattern that federal judges the closest to the facts, that is to say district judges, across an ideological spectrum, across a spectrum of being appointed by presidents, when seeing the activities, particularly of ICE and federal agents, but generally the Trump administration, have used the most sort of pointed language about the constitutional violations that they're seeing when they're closest to the facts.
So true. And they, until recently, kind of tiptoed up to it. Even today, you have Judge Young in Boston accusing cabinet secretaries of conspiring to violate the Constitution. That, there has always been an assumption of regularity for what the department does. That has been completely exploded. And you see judge after judge appointed by both parties basically saying that's a pretext. That's not true. You didn't cooperate. The sort of thing that would have been stunning in a previous Department of Justice. They are now increasingly emboldened to just call out what it really is.
And that brings us to where we are tonight with the news that there's some formal criminal investigation and grand jury subpoenas going out to the governor and the mayor. Here's a list just of some of the people that we have either indictments for or subpoenas or investigations. Kate Abou-Ghazaleh, who's running for Congress in Illinois', I believe, 7th District, who was outside a DHS facility where she was shoved twice by two different federal officers. She's been charged. John Bolton, of course, who was searched and been charged. James Comey, Jason Crow, who was in that video. You've got Mark Kelly, LaMonica McIver, one of the first instances we've seen this, who was outside that ICE facility in Newark, New Jersey. Jerome Powell, the Fed chair, who's now in the crosshairs. I mean, at some level, Harry, the irony is that they have cheapened the meaning of all of this and the teeth of it in some ways by abusing it so obviously and manifestly pretextually.
I mean, that's it. It's completely pretextual, meaning it's going nowhere. I think Ken is right. This is one of those, and I'll get back to in a moment, that have really been engineered just for its interim effect. They know they can't get any kind of conviction here. But I would say you showed that whole tableau. It's gotten worse in the last week or two. Before he was doing tawdry, petty, nasty personal recrimination. Now, on the losing side of policy battles, he's trying to bring to bear the blunderbuss of the federal prosecutorial power to win battles he's otherwise losing. He's getting beat in Minneapolis. He's trying to change the interest rates of the Fed, and he can't do that. And then is when he's coming in with these criminal charges. That's a whole different level of outrage, it seems to me, because it tries to corruptly play dirty with the actual political process that he is otherwise losing.
Yeah, it's a really a great point. There's some talk tonight about, he had said something yesterday, and again, Trump has this there's always this weird game of telephone of how he has interpreted some either kernel of a fact or a piece of the law. He said the other day if he would be asked about considering an Insurrection Act, which he clearly has been teasing and talking about, and Stephen Miller keeps talking about, and he said something along the lines of, if a governor or mayor impeded our abilities, then yes, I would do it. And there's some thinking that maybe this is essentially, this criminal investigation is both to browbeat and to get the headline and to intimidate, but to lay some, very, very weak, thin predicate for an Insurrection Act declaration.
And but you're right. All the way through, it's been just complete tirades against Walz in particular. Buffoon, dumb, it's all his fault. This is a complete non-starter of a prosecution. The statute that Ken refers to requires force, intimidation, or threats. There's no way they could prove that. But even more, as you say, Chris, the First Amendment prevents any kind of action unless it is imminent and lawless. He'd have to basically be going, it's a little bit like January 6th, to the people of Minneapolis and saying, run in the streets and lay your bodies down and keep the feds from doing their job. So it can't go anywhere. However, besides the interim aspects of it, that subpoena, it's so easy, as you say, to issue a subpoena. And it's a grave thing to try to defy a subpoena, even in a total garbage lawsuit as this is. So the question is, will they be able to forage in the files of Walz and Frey? That is probably their game. It's not as ridiculous as the rest of it. But I'm here to tell you, the actual charge under 372, a complete and utter non-starter, will never happen.
All right, Harry Litman, always great to get to hear your perspective on nights like this. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Chris.
Much more on the Trump offensive in Minnesota and, frankly, on the country and the Constitution. Jamelle Bouie joins me next. Don't go anywhere. For 2 weeks now, armed mass federal agents have laid siege to Minneapolis. This week, the Trump administration has floated the idea of using the Insurrection Act of 1807 to sic the U.S. military on protesters there. Today, we're just learning about these federal subpoenas from Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey. Jamelle Bouie is a New York Times opinion columnist. His latest piece, This Is Not How a Normal President Speaks, examines Trump's obsession with king-like power, and he joins me now. Jamelle, you've been doing some great work on both Trump and what's happening in Minnesota. I guess it's not surprising that this happened, these subpoenas, but it does strike me as genuinely menacing, another rip in the constitutional order. What do you think?
I think that's right. I think it represents a president and administration who does not believe that anyone in the country has any legitimate reason or ability to criticize them, critique them, even exercise their rights, right? Like, states are co-sovereigns in the American system. Governor Tim Walz has every right but to criticize the president, has every right to direct state agencies, state law enforcement, to investigate violations of state crimes, state laws rather, even if it's committed by federal agents. That's all well within his purview as governor, but Trump rejects that. The other thing is that Trump, Stephen Miller, the administration, does not know how to make any move other than escalate when it comes to political conflict. And so in the face of what looks like a real political defeat, right, the public has turned very decisively against these ICE operations. Their next move, as always, is to escalate in hopes that their opponent will back down or will break.
It's one of the hard things to do in covering Trump is to maintain two different categories, which is what he wants to do, his aspirations, which I think are plainly essentially the end of the constitutional republic, its replacement with a presidential dictatorship cult of personality around him, what he wants to do, and what he's going to be able to do. And you've written and thought about this a lot. What's striking here, again, the aspiration is authoritarian, but also ineffectual. I mean, I think, at least in the limited, right? There's a big gap here. There's almost something like he's almost making it kind of impotent and pathetic to do these criminal cases because he's tried to do so many, and so many have been essentially tossed out.
Trump thinks about the presidency and presidential power like a 12-year-old. He thinks about it like someone whose understanding is the president presses a button and a thing happens. This is not to diminish the seriousness of these subpoenas, right? It is very serious that the president is trying to criminally investigate his political opponents. At the same time, as you mentioned earlier in the broadcast, the DOJ only really does cases when they think they can win them. These aren't winnable cases. These are wastes of time. And the DOJ is already hemorrhaging lawyers as a result of both purges last year and just people leaving because they don't want to be a part of this. And so they don't really have the resources to really pursue these things. They are threats similar to the kinds of lawsuit threats that Trump would make as a private citizen against people who were in his way or who were trying to, get something out of him or trying to hold him to a promise or a deal or something. He'll threaten to sue them and hope that the threat of litigation pushes them away, causes them to back down. And he's basically trying to do that with the U.S. federal government, sort of not understanding, right, that other people can push back as well. There's other people are actors here, they have agency. And that B, doing this repeatedly just makes you weak. It makes the next set of people more likely to say, oh, this is just nonsense.
Yeah, exactly. I think our reaction to the news of Justice Department launches subpoenas against a governor or mayor a year ago would have been very different. And it would have felt scarier, I think, for the targets a year ago in some ways than it does now because of precisely what you're saying. There's also the kind of sword and shield dynamic here, which is on a day when he's sicking the Justice Department against political opponents who have done absolutely nothing illegal and purely constitutionally protected speech. We got a whole new raft of pardons today, too. And there's an incredible irony here because some of them were people that committed fraud, which is the ostensible predicate for this entire surge. One woman was convicted of fraud for selling counterfeit energy drinks and then commuted by Trump in the first term. And then she got out of prison because of Trump and went and committed another fraud, an unrelated fraud. And Trump pardoned her for the second one. The other one is this gem, which I just have to bring up. This is a portable toilet executive who was sent to prison in an illegal dumping scheme. The owner of Diamond Environmental Services, the portable toilet empire based in San Marcos, sentenced to 5 months in federal prison. Basically, they were taking the stuff from their porta potties and illegally stuffing it in the sewage systems of municipalities, which is incredibly illegal. And that guy got a pardon. And the point being, all this stuff traces back to which side of the friend or foe line you're at. Have you hired the right lawyers? Have you given donations to the super PAC? Which is the only dividing line in the worldview here.
Yeah, no, fraudsters stick together, and the president sees pardon as an opportunity to make some easy money. I'm going to say something real quick. I think that should there be a Democratic president in 2029, should there be a Democratic Congress, that we should treat all of these, or the Democrats should treat all of these pardons as basically null and void. Just treat them as null and void. I don't know what that looks like legislatively. I don't know what that looks like legally, but I think there's a pretty good constitutional case that these are illicit, illegal pardons and should not be treated with any kind of respect.
Yeah, in fact, the thought experiment of essentially a quid pro quo pardon for pay was one of the things at the center of the oral arguments in that famous Roberts case that granted the immunity the president has so egregiously. But even they were like, seems something wrong about that. That shouldn't be in the constitutional order. So we may find out if people stick to that. Jamelle Bouie, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Still ahead, the latest evidence that most Americans hate just about everything Donald Trump is doing, really. We'll show you the numbers next. When Donald Trump was sworn in, immigration was his strongest issue. It was where he polled the highest. take for just one example, but there's tons of these. This is a CNN poll from last year showing that 51% of people approved of his handling of immigration at the time versus 48% who disapproved. That was in March. It was even higher before he was sworn in, when he was sort of riding the crest of his victory. Now those numbers have more than flipped. Just 42% of people approving his approach to immigration and 58% disapproving. People particularly dislike what Trump is doing with ICE, sending agents to occupy their cities, snatch people out of the streets, tear gas protesters, children, babies of 6 months. Here's an example. So this is just in the last few days. Quinnipiac University did a poll after ICE officer killed Renee Good last week, found that 57% of people disapprove of the way ICE is enforcing immigration laws, and just 40% approve. In the main, people do not like the chaos Trump has brought to their streets, and the damage is dragging Republicans down. Data journalist G. Elliott Morris is the author of the excellent Strength in Numbers Substack, which I read, and he joins me now. Elliott, let's just start on the immigration stuff, because, again, you don't want to take too much from one poll, and a lot of phrasing around this stuff can get complicated, but it does seem to me we've now got polling on immigration and polling on ICE and enough data to come to some conclusions. What are you seeing and what you're looking at?
Chris, I think, first, thanks for having me. I think that there are two numbers people should take away from this segment. Okay, the first is minus 17. That's the number in the Quinnipiac University poll that shows the difference between the percent of Americans who think the ICE shooting of Renee Good was justified, a justified use of force, to use the language of the poll, and the percent of Americans who say that this was not justified. It's also similar to the overall approval rating of ICE from that same survey. The second number is minus 30. That's the same question, but among political independents. So among political independents, 59% of them say that they don't think that ICE should have used the amount of force that they used against Renee Good in prosecuting Donald Trump's mass deportation agenda. Okay, 29%. Just for context, they say that it was a justified use of force. So if I can interpret this, I think it tells us one big thing. The people do not like the main reason that they elected Donald Trump, or the voters elected Donald Trump in 2024. The first big reason being inflation, the second one being immigration. If Donald Trump is at minus 30 among swing voters on his supposedly number one issue, I think that renders a verdict on this presidency that people should pay attention to. It tells us something about the sanctioning of power by public opinion to the president, and is sort of squarely in the negative about what they're seeing from their White House and how they want the country to change course.
Yeah, so it's not just on immigration. I mean, we're seeing pretty abysmal numbers across the board. You were arguing today that there's, in the polling average, and again, all this stuff is like we're in aggregates and we're getting into tenths of percents, but there's an argument that he's less popular now than he even was at this point in his first term, even though that's slightly counterintuitive, because there was a sense that, like, he won an outright majority this time. He was more popular going in, but the sort of slope downward has been steeper so far.
That's right. So Donald Trump starts higher in his second term, and he is where he was at this point in his first term. 40% of Americans say that they consider themselves Republicans at this point. That was 46% when he started. To put more spin on this, right, there's if Donald Trump was at 39%, 39% of Americans saying they were Republicans, that would be a record low. It has not been that low since quarter four of 2008, the middle of the financial crisis. Donald Trump is a Great Recession president. I mean, we can even go back even further than that. There hasn't been this negative a verdict against a president so quickly, compared to Gerald Ford, who pardoned Richard Nixon after Watergate. So if your question is like, how do Americans feel about this and what do they want their government to be doing? The only data-driven conclusion you can draw is that they hate it, to use your phrasing from this segment, and they want things to change. And I think that we live in a democracy, so people should pay attention to that conclusion.
Yeah, and so there's another vector here to consider. So there's, how do you feel about given issues, right? And those issues can be in the news, and there's been polling on Venezuela, and there's been polling on Greenland, which, people do not seem particularly enthused about the U.S. invading Greenland, to give one example. But then there's also the question of, like, well, what do you think of what the president is focusing on? And this, I think, in some ways is the worst number for him, or in some ways the most revealing, because there is this real palpable sense of a bait and switch, right? runs on groceries. I'm going to lower prices on day one. And now all he can talk about is like, maybe we're going to pay each Greenlander $500,000 so I can take over Greenland. And I want someone else's Nobel Peace Prize. And I do think for people that are not super aware of politics, aren't locked in every day, you are getting a lot coming out that doesn't seem to be about the thing that you're most concerned about and that presumably got him the kind of necessary 3 or 4% to win. So this is polling on his priorities. Does he have the right priorities? 36% say yes, 64% no. This strikes me as possibly the single biggest problem they have right now.
Yeah, and it's striking, right? Because the entire narrative about the Democratic Party in 2025 was that it didn't have the right priorities.
Right.
And I wrote on my Substack, Strength in Numbers, at the time that actually, if you look at the Republican Party's priorities, they look even worse. There was an entire narrative in the sort of Democratic consultant class that they lost the last election because of this. Even if you believe that that's true, cast it forward a year, cast it forward 9 months to November. And the conclusion I think we draw from that is very similar. People don't, not only do they not like what they're getting, or they don't feel like they got what they voted for in 2024, they don't like how far Donald Trump has pushed public policy on all sorts of things, right? We've talked about some foreign policy here. We should mention Iran also. Donald Trump now says he's going to be the sort of savior of the Iranian people. People don't like this public policy in the Middle East either. I'm actually struggling to think of one thing. And I look at polling data all day that Donald Trump has the public at his back on. And to your point, that is a entire flipping of the narrative from 2024, from the 2024 election, which sort of states Donald Trump is the dominant sort of mandate winning public figure. He's the only person with his pulse on American democracy. I think those of us in the know knew that that was BS at the time. And the data now really proves that point, I believe.
All right, Elliot Morris, his Substack Strength in Numbers. Check it out. Thanks a lot. That was great. We'll be right back.